Well, welcome in to another edition of Sweet Tea and Coffee, the show where we sit down and have conversations about all sorts of things in the context of friendship. My name is Kendall McDonald. I'm the lead pastor here at Fredonia Hill, and joining me, as always, my co-host Blake Russell, who's our worship pastor here. And today we got a treat for you. So we've had a lot of feedback. Folks have been writing in and talking to us about what they want to hear. And for sure, thank you for that. But one of the things that somebody asked for is for Blake and I to disagree. So welcome into the show where we're going to disagree right from the top. Stick around for this edition of Sweet Tea and Coffee.
I didn't know this was happening.
Okay, so I teased the show that this is going to be a show where we disagree, and love that feedback and love the heart of where that comes from. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, okay, where can Blake and I disagree? We don't have tons and tons that we disagree on, but I got to thinking,
knows about.
Not that I know about, that's right. But I got to thinking about it, and I thought, wait a minute. The whole premise of this show is based on disagreement. I don't drink sweet tea.
You should.
I should. And you don't drink coffee.
No way.
And so built into the fabric of this show is disagreement. So I'm kind of just kidding. We're actually not going to disagree on this show because, again, the whole premise of the show is disagreement. So we disagree on that, and maybe we will someday occupy an entire show talking about the merits of sweet tea versus coffee, but not today. And in all seriousness, disagreement in the context of friendship is really important, and there will very likely be things that come up, not necessarily maybe as an episode, but things that come up as we have conversation where we do disagree, and we've disagreed in our friendship before and worked through those things. But we won't have that topic for today. Today, I want to talk about the habits and the disciplines of a Christ follower, and that sounds really preachy, so hang in there.
Wow.
But today, I want to be really, 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 really practical, and I want to just talk about the disciplines that you, Blake, have gone through in your life, how those things have changed. I want to talk a little bit to people specifically that might say, listen, I want to seriously follow Jesus. What does that look like, and where do I begin? What disciplines are important? How do I do that? That seems like a question that we don't oftentimes have a clear answer.
It's a really good question.
It's a great question. So that's where I kind of want to go today. So the first thing I want to set up is just kind of an overarching viewpoint on this issue, and to kind of put discipleship in terms of formation. So one of the really neat images in the scriptures is the potter and the clay, that God is forming us and shaping us and making us into something. So let's try to look at discipleship as being formed by God. Formed into what? The question is, what are we being formed into? Well, we're being formed into the person and character of Jesus, and that's happening by the Holy Spirit. And so around here, one of the words that we use, and we stole this from Dallas Willard, who uses the word apprenticeship. It's a word that we're more familiar with. But an apprentice is literally someone that's being formed by a professional to do that job and to be like that person. And the Holy Spirit in us is forming us to be like Jesus. So the very beginning question of discipleship, I think, is this: what are the things in my life that are forming me? Because I think we always like to jump to the first thing. What do I do? What disciplines should I do? Well, how much should I read my Bible? How much should I pray? What time of day should I do that? Blah, 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 blah. But I think it's interesting to think about the question from a little higher vantage point, a 30,000 kind of foot view, is if you were to look at a sum total of your life, if you were just lay that, and I've said this before, if you were to just lay all of that out, and you were to ask the question, what of these things, or which of these things are forming me? How much of those things would be forming you into the person of Jesus, and what of those things would be forming you into maybe something else? What do you think about that starting point of stepping back and saying, okay, what is forming me? What's shaping me? And kind of that being the beginning of this process of actually creating habits and routines. What's your perspective?
You know, I like that. That's the question. I think a lot of times when we say spiritual disciplines and we think of like lists of things. You kind of mentioned that a second ago, of lists of things that I do that are going to get me to a place, and it's that just seems like that's exhausting and tiring. And will it accomplish anything at all? So I like this. What is forming me? I think that's a great question to ask. And almost freeing in perspective of how to accomplish or to go after those things.
Yeah, because I think if we don't ask that question first, and listen, this is speaking from experience. So you've heard my background, a Methodist background, and being Methodist, I don't think has anything to do with this. But when I was growing up, in terms of spiritual disciplines, memorizing scripture,
right,
doing those sorts of things, I would say my Baptist friends were ahead of the game. That was something that was really, really, really prioritized. And again, this is no shade on Methodists. I'm not saying that they didn't do that at all. I'm just saying in the context I was in, I don't recall that kind of stuff being highly emphasized as comparison to,
right,
say, my wife, who grew up in the Baptist church, has a song for every book of the Bible, memorized tons of script. I mean, just in terms of just discipline kind of stuff, she is off the charts, and I still feel like I'm catching up, and a lot has to do with my background. But okay, so all that. My point is, when I jumped into a world where disciplines were being emphasized, what I did was I tried to put those disciplines, I tried to install them into my life as it stood. Mm-hmm. And it didn't fit. I didn't have space for those things. They weren't forming me in the way that I wanted to. And I think, as I reflect back, I think that part of the reason why is because I never started with that first question. I never started with an inventory to say, okay, what do I want to be forming me? Do I want the things of God to form me, or do I want the things of man to form me? And then what, in terms of my habits and disciplines in my life already, are not forming me?
Yeah.
By God. So let's take those off the plate so that we can put these on, and there's more purpose to putting these on. I don't think we do that very often. I think we just jam spiritual disciplines into the already packed schedule, if you will. Yeah. And they don't have the desired impact. And I think what's one of the words we hear all the time? I'm burned out. Yeah. It's just legalistic. I'm burned out. And it's crazy to me because if you, like, those disciplines, those things that we're doing ought to be some of the most life-giving things that we do. So I just want to ask you this question. I'm going to make this, I told people I was going to make this practical. I intend to do that. One of the questions I love to ask people, we actually ask this in our interviews for potential elders, and I love asking this question. What are for you, and be practical, like, what are the habits and the disciplines in your life right now that you feel like are really important to you in terms of formation?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to preface it first, and then I'm going to jump back in history, because that's what I like to do. So I think for me, solitude and prayer is really, really formational for me, and focusing on those things. Now I'm going to jump back to where that started and why that has just been a continuation of something in my entire life. And I'm going to do that by starting with a story from my dad.
I knew Roger was going to make his how many fourth, fifth, sixth appearance? So, in as many episodes.
He's just got a lot of stories a lot of interesting stories. So, and I actually mentioned one. I'm not going to mention it. So really today, all that I'm going to talk about it briefly. But my dad was, he always was just, I don't know, he could pray. And he prayed in a way, not like he would get up on Sunday morning and like have this amazing prayer that he'd pray in front of the entire church, but like his prayer life to me was always inspiring. He just had a real, frank relationship with the Lord. And so often I've heard stories about those conversations that he's had with God. And I mentioned one at our men's Bible study last week about praying for. I'm just going to say this is sound funny. Praying for a woman, and how God was faithful in that. This is another one that was. I think about it often, about God's provision and just the trust and the relationship that Dad had with the Lord, or has with the Lord. So when I was a kid, we were wanting to move out of the city. We lived in town, which was, if you know Roger Russell, that's like a prison for him. And we felt like he wanted to move out kind of where he grew up. And there was a piece of land that was not far, just down the road from where he grew up, and it was a decent piece of land, except the fact that it was for 50 years, it was pretty much a junkyard for people just to dump all their trash and everything on. And Dad, I remember him talking about going out there and just spending time on that property, walking the property and just praying and knowing. And one of the things that he was praying was saying, God, I can't purchase this land. I don't have the funds unless I just have a place to live for free. And that's just not I just don't see how that's going to happen. And when he got in the truck and went home, and first thing that Mom said was like, hey, I just got this weird phone call from one of your cousins. And they said that they've got a house that's next door to them that they own, that they just want to offer to us to live for free as long as we need to. And so we can purchase this land and eventually build a house and all this stuff. And I remember hearing Dad tell that story when I was a kid. And I think whenever I was in probably middle school, junior high age, I really started processing through what it meant to have a personal relationship with the Lord. And I'd been saved for a few years, but I don't think I was putting that practicality to what that actually looked like. And when you're in junior high, that's when you first start kind of really becoming aware of the difficulties and trials in life. And I don't know what it is, algebra. It was difficult, or who knows what it was, which is funny. My algebra teacher was Andy Benford. So if he was too difficult, we may have to talk to him about that. But you start kind of experiencing those things. And I remember hearing that story about my dad talking about how those times in solitude and in walking in the woods and praying and really listening to the Lord speak, how that was impactful to him. So I thought, well, I can try that too. And I specifically remember a moment of going out. We had some woods just right next to our house, and I had a hammock out there because I just had my little fort, my hammock and everything. And, I was like, I'm just going to go out there with no plan. I'm going to go out there, I'm going to lay in that hammock, and I'm just going to start talking to God. And I remember it's like I'm visualizing it right now. I remember laying in that hammock, looking at the top of pine trees and just laying it all out there for the Lord. And I think, and it was so freeing and so formational. And it was like I didn't hear the Lord audibly speak, but I felt like a peace come over me. And that was kind of the moment where that, as informal as it was, that prayer life began with me. And to this day, I'm going to go walk. I'm going to spend time alone with the Lord. And that's huge in my life. And it's cool to kind of trace it back to that moment of laying in that hammock, looking up at the sky and thinking about and praying and just audibly saying, God, this is what I'm struggling with. This is what I need. And this is, speak to me, and just feeling the response to getting that back from the Lord. So that's one that's still very much important in my life. And there's my history jumping back however many years to where that began.
So that's still a practice that you partake in. Has it grown from that moment? Because what's interesting about that moment, and I think a lot of times actually this is the way that these things happen for us, is that we kind of stumble into those things a little bit.
Yeah.
I say stumble in, you observed somebody else. So let's talk about that as being important. You watched somebody else and you thought, okay, I'm going to have that for myself. Mm-hmm. I don't know what happens there. It reminds me, when the disciples, they say, teach us to pray. It's like they've seen something happen. When this guy goes away to pray, something happens and they go, okay, teach us, teach us that. So you saw somebody go away to pray. Mm-hmm. You said, I'm going to do that in my own life. And so there was intentionality there. But as you discovered the power of those kind of moments, has it now been something that you a little bit more consciously are placing in your life? Do you have like a routine for that? Once a week, twice a week, hours? Like, how structured does that look for you now?
Yeah, it's not as structured as far as like every Monday morning I'm going to go on a prayer walk kind of thing. But I do try to regularly spend time. Life doesn't always give us time to go out into the wilderness. But there are times where it's like, okay, I do need to build that into my schedule. And so, no, I'm not going to say I have a 7:00 meeting every Monday morning. But I do intentionally, and I should do it more often. I think that's always what we always say when we talk about spiritual distance, like I need to be better about it.
Yeah, that's always the caveat.
Right. But it is something that I regularly try to do. It's not, I don't want to get to those moments where I'm like destitute. I'm like, okay, now I need to run away and hide and spend time alone with the Lord. I think there's times for those, but I don't want that to be the only time when algebra is real hard that I've got to get out there and sort my life out with God. So I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not giving you specifics, but that's
good. And I think that in many ways that's freeing. Because again, I think what we do is instead of the goal being formation, I think many times when we come into the area of spiritual disciplines, the goal is the completion of a task. And is a schedule good? I want to be the first to say, absolutely.
Yeah.
You plan for what's important, right? So is routine and schedule and a conscious effort to do those things good? Absolutely. But at the same time, the goal is formation. And just doing it to do it doesn't produce that kind of formation. So I think it's freeing for people to hear that it's ebbed and flowed in your life,
And for me, as my life changes and seasons change, learning how to have that conversation in all situations and whatever circumstance. Even like this morning, I was sitting over here listening to, I'm going to plug some music, the Appalachian Journey. It's kind of like some string quartet stuff, but got some mandolin and some traditional. It's my favorite like meditation music. I also use it when I want to get work done, and so maybe that's a little bit of both. But I was listening to that, and it was an instrumental version of Amazing Grace, and it was like in that moment, I just began to have a conversation with the Lord about the grace that I feel right now, and how that just, it wasn't like a scheduled moment, but that walking and talking with the Lord, that's something that I've really tried to develop over the years since that moment of like going out and laying in the hammock. But okay, what does that look like wherever I'm at? I'm not always going to have the opportunity to run away or, get away from my kids in the quiet to have this deep moment with the Lord, because sometimes that's just not the opportunity that I have. And so what does it look like to walk with the Lord, to pray in the moments that are not quite as peaceful?
Yeah. So if somebody came to you, and I think this is a fair question, I'm going to put you on the spot.
This whole thing's been on the spot, so
True. This was one of those moments where I said, okay, just hit record. Here we go. I've got some ideas. If somebody came to you and said, all right, Blake, I want to be serious about following Jesus. I want my life to look that way. Help me just to be practical. Mm-hmm. What do you say? What do you say in that? How do you help people along in those first steps of that journey?
I think the first thing is being willing to walk alongside of them in that journey. That's the key. When you say practical, it's like, okay, let me write you out a list.
Yeah.
And I just don't think that's the case. I was thinking about, I'm going to just stick on prayer because that's kind of the thing that we've put out there.
Yeah.
There's been moments that I have specifically taken Emery, my oldest, out with me in these moments, and her and I will walk and talk, and then we will talk about the Lord and talk about prayer, and in its tiny little microcosm right there. I think that's an example of like, if somebody comes to me and says, I want to know what it means to follow the Lord, I think I have to be willing to walk alongside them and be an example of that. I don't think we can just hand them a list and say, this is what Scripture says, and I don't think I can say this is what works for me. I think you have to see it, to have to experience that with somebody.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's really important, and I think it challenges us in our relationships with others. Do we have space in our life to bring somebody else along? And that ebbs and flows depending on what season of life you're in. Sometimes that's with your kids. That also has to do with friendships, and are we open in our lives to have somebody else participate in it? I think I might start answering that question kind of with where we started today, and I might ask somebody before I just tell you, okay, here's all the things that you should do. I think that there's a real need to declutter. We do this with our stuff, right? We accumulate a bunch of stuff, and then what do? We realize, well, we do in America. We do in the West. We do a couple of things. We buy bigger houses and more storage space to have all of our stuff. But in moments where we're really constrained, what do? We clean up. We clean out. And the point is, we clean out because something new needs to come in, and in order to make space for a new thing, we have to take some old things out. Like you're going to need to, those jeans that look good in 1999.
You know how difficult that is for me. Ashley needs to be on this podcast today because she's the one that's really good at cleaning things out. My old jeans, and I'm like, oh, they still have a little bit of life. There's not too many holes in them.
I've been amazed. I won't say the name of the place on this podcast, but there's a store that I think has made the I don't know how they're making money on their jeans, because with kids' jeans, if they rip within a year and you have the receipt, you can take them back.
Wow.
Our son literally goes through.
I mean, that usually takes a few days.
Yeah, it's like, they have got to be losing money on our family. Anyway, okay, so the point is, there is a need to take inventory and go, okay, if something new is going to come in, something old has to go away. So if somebody asks me that question, I might say, okay, then step back, right where we started this show, step back and take inventory of your life. What are you, kind of figuratively imagine, what are you setting the eyes of your heart on? Mm-hmm. What are the things that you focus on? And those things that you're focused on, those things that consistently have your attention, those are the things that are forming you.
Yeah.
There's a direct correlation where we set the eyes of our heart. Those are the things that are forming us. So let's just take a little inventory. And how do we feel about the things that are forming us? What are those main things? I think for many of us, we're going to have to look at things like our media consumption,
right?
Whether that be social media, news, Netflix, television, whatever. Like, we're going to have to look at that, and we're going to go, okay, I set the eyes of my heart on those things quite a bit, and do I like the way that that's forming me? Some of us are going to have to look at the opinions of others and how those form us. Some of us are going to, so the point is, I'm taking inventory of what forms me, because I'm coming into the conversation saying, I want to be formed by the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And my first challenge to somebody is going to be, is there space for that?
Yeah, that's a really good observation. I mean, you talk about decluttering. Like that's the first and foremost thing that we have to do.
Because if you try to jam spiritual disciplines into a life that is so jam-packed being formed by other things, then you're just going to be doing other things.
Right.
Because there's no space.
And then you get to that burnout.
And then
what's going to go first?
That's right. That's right. Because all I'm doing is just going through a set of actions. I'm not actually listening and paying attention. And the reason I'm not listening and paying attention is because my attention is only, imagine like a bucket.
Yeah.
It can only be so full. And if what's forming me is liquid being poured into that bucket. If I'm consuming all sorts of other things, then regardless of the truth that the Holy Spirit has to give, there's no space for it. And so then all my disciplines are just actions, and they're not actually forming me. So the first thing we got to do is we got to say what's getting in, and what things need to be cleaned out. And let me just challenge you here. This is something I am working hard on in my own life, and I'll give you an example. The things that you're looking for that need to be cleaned out are not always going to be in and of themselves negative things.
Yeah.
Sometimes they are, for sure. Sometimes they are. And those things need to go. Sometimes they are just things that are in and of themselves, neither good nor bad.
Yeah.
But they're forming us in a way that they shouldn't. So I'll give you an example. If I looked at it, about a month ago, if I were to look at what's forming me, what am I laying my eyes on? One of the things that I would have to admit to you is that in kind of moments of mental downtime where I'm not thinking about one specific thing or working on one specific thing, I found myself on Amazon, my little Amazon app, looking for all sorts of, for whatever it is. If a thought came to my mind of something, oh, I need that, I don't have that. I mean, I'm directly onto the.
Oh, it's so quick.
Onto the app, right?
Easy, yeah.
And as I kind of started going through this exercise a little bit on my own, it was one of the things I thought, now wait a minute, what's that training me, or herein that forming me? What's that forming me to do? Well, what I'm training my brain to do is that when I recognize a need, to immediately fill that need with something that I can purchase.
Right.
Okay. Does that line up with the scriptures? No, not at all. But the thing that I was setting my attention to was forming a habit in my life. That need was not directly to prayer and conversation with God, but need was go consume and get what you can for yourself. Go purchase, go be a consumer, right? So one of the things I had to do in this inventory is I had to say, okay, that's not good for me. Mm-hmm. Amazon is great. The convenience of, being able to go out and get what you need is great. What's not great is the formation of a habit that says that that's how I provide for myself.
Right.
So,
the reliance
what did I have to do? I deleted the app. And I said to myself, okay, if I really, really, really need something, then I'm going to have put thought to it, mm-hmm. and I will make a plan, and I will set aside time to go and purchase that thing.
Right.
I'm not going to just consume out of a knee-jerk reaction to purchase and fill need. Well, that cleared some space. So now here's what happens. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Now I still look for that app.
Right.
But now in that moment of need, that app not being there, it triggers a pause long enough for me to say, okay, a new habit needs to set in. Something new needs to form me. And I'm not saying that like kicks me into this deep meditation
but it's
prayer,
a reminder.
But it's a pause and a reminder of who God is, that he supplies for every need, of my need to be a good steward, right? So the point is something new is starting to form me. And that's where I would challenge people to start with a bit of a decluttering. And once there's space, then let's start to talk about, and I'm not saying that the decluttering needs to take 2 years and then but take a minute and like write some of those things down, and don't be afraid of cutting things out of your life. Your flesh is going to tell you, don't do that. You need that. Don't be afraid of cutting things out of your life. What you're doing is you're making space for something new. And that new thing is unknown, but that new thing is God's voice in your life, and it's good for you. And if we're wanting to be shaped like Jesus, we've got to create that space.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm just thinking about how, decluttering, making that space, allows you to have that moment. If, say, someone does come to you and say, walk with me in this process, where you have room to be able to do that. You have an opportunity to share a story. Like my dad shared this story with me of how the Lord was moving in his life and how he had that relationship and interaction, that discipline, which challenged me to want to go after that myself. And so if you don't have any of that space because you're so cluttered with everything else, even good things, you're not going to have that opportunity to be able to share that. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I appreciate, like, I know that I just dove in and was like, okay, tell me the deep crevices of your spiritual life and, that sort of thing. But I really appreciate you answering that, because I think for a lot of people listening, I know for myself, one of the things that has been most beneficial to me is exactly like what you portrayed with your dad, is actually hearing what does it look like in somebody else's life.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we share our successes and our failures in it and the process, the things that we've learned. I've gained a lot from that over the years. So I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, you guys have really, I've been amazed at, number one, the response to this podcast. I've been blown away that anybody wants to listen. Thank you for listening. That's been really cool. And thank you for giving us your feedback. We've had a ton of emails of people just saying, hey, like the podcast, here's some things to explore, here's some things to talk about. One of the things that came up was a Q&A podcast. Now, I don't know exactly how that would work. What we would have to have enough questions.
We need some questions.
Yeah, so I think that's actually pretty interesting. So here's what I'd love to do. I'd love to just challenge you, if you're listening, to write into the podcast, which is really, really, really simple. It's
stc@fredoniahill.org. Just send us an email.
Or you can call or text Blake or I and let us know whatever.
If you know how to get a hold of us, it all goes the same place.
But yeah, like if we were to do just a kind of rifle through a few questions, and that may not be the format we do, but if we were to do that, what questions would you ask? What would you want to hear talked about? You guys have done a great job submitting those things, but I kind of like the idea of a quick Q&A podcast. It can be whatever category, and maybe that'll be the fun of it. Is it's from all sorts of different.
We'll probably still filter through it.
That's right. So I'm gonna end by, Blake, you're on a road trip, and let's say this is not just like a 2 or 3 hour road trip. This is a big one. This is one where you need stamina and energy. It's like in the 12-hour range. It's going to be a long day on the road. You stop at the filling station, and the snack of choice to keep you focused, keep you going, snack, drink, whatever it is what? What would you say?
Beef jerky, 100%.
Beef jerky.
That's my go-to on trips.
There it is. Sure. So that's a good example of the Q&A. That's an important thing.
That's a great burning question that everybody had.
That's right. You need to know. So that when you're on a long road trip with Blake, you've got a good supply of beef.
That's it.
Jerky. All right. Hey, thank you guys so much for listening. Send us any of your questions and thoughts at the email, and we will see you soon. Adios.